The town of Dead Willow was built on thirst. It thirsted for water, which the creek barely gave, and it thirsted for salvation, which it mistook for judgment. The dust was not just on the ground. It was in every man's throat and on every woman's heart. It was a fine yellow grit that settled on windowsills and good intentions, grinding them both down to nothing. In this Wyoming territory, in the shank of the 1870s, Clara Loudon carried a weight heavier than any water bucket. She carried the shame of her father's gambling, the raw, fresh grief of her brother's hanging, and now, a secret growing in her belly. She had been living under the roof of her uncle, the Reverend Amos Loudon, for 3 months. 3 months since her brother, Thomas, was found swaying from a cottonwood, a rough sign pinned to his shirt that read, "Cattle Thief." The scandal had shattered what was left of their family, and the town, hungry for a villain, had devoured Thomas's reputation and spit out the pieces. Clara, left with nowhere else to turn, became the preacher's ward, a living reminder of sin for him to polish with prayer and hard chores. That morning, the heat was a solid thing, a blanket thrown over the town. Clara was scrubbing the front steps of the church, her knuckles raw, the lye soap and the sourness in her stomach churned. She had been fighting it for weeks, a morning sickness that felt like a judgment all its own. She stood up too fast, the world tilting. The smell of the forge down the street, the hot iron and coal smoke hit her. A wave of nausea, sharp and sudden, forced a hand to her mouth. She could not be sick in front of the church, not where he could see. She ran. She stumbled into the alley between the blacksmith shed and the general store. The shadows were deep, smelling of horse manure and rust. She leaned against the rough plank wall and gave up what little biscuit she had eaten. Her body heaved, emptying itself until she was just a shaking, hollow thing. She wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, her chest aching. Just a sickness, she told herself. Just the heat, but she knew. She had known since the first time she'd missed her monthly trial. She stepped back out of the alley, blinking against the brutal sun. The town square was mostly empty, save for Mrs. Davies sweeping the porch of the land office and 2 old-timers spitting tobacco juice near the trough. Clara put a hand on the hitching post, just to steady herself. She took 1 step, then another. The ground did not seem solid. It felt like walking on water, and she was sinking. The face of Mrs. Davies blurred, her bonnet turning into a white smear. The world went black at the edges, then rushed in to claim the center. Clara Loudon fell. She did not crumple. She fell straight back, like a felled tree, her head hitting the packed dirt with a sound that was both dull and final. The dust settled on her face. "Mrs." Davies was the first to shriek. It was a thin, bird-like sound that cut the heavy air. "Lord preserve! The preacher's girl!" The old-timers shuffled over. Mr. Sloan, the blacksmith, came out, wiping his hands on a rag. In moments, a small circle had formed. They stared down at her. She was a curiosity, like a dead hawk in the road. "Is she breathing?" Mr. Sloan asked, his voice a low rumble. "It's the heat," Mrs. Davies said, fanning herself, though she made no move to fan Clara. Or her constitution, weak blood, that family. It was then that Mrs. Peabody, the storekeep's wife, pushed through. She was a broad woman who saw everything and forgave nothing. She knelt, not with kindness, but with purpose. She put her hand on Clara's forehead, then, as if by accident, let her hand drift down. It brushed the collar of Clara's dress, moved to her waist, and then stopped, pressing flat against her stomach. The woman's eyes went wide. She looked up, not at Clara, but at the other faces watching her. She did not need to speak. Her expression was enough. It was the look of a person who had just confirmed the worst possible suspicion. "Sweet Mary," Mrs. Davies whispered, her hand flying to her own throat. "She is with child." The word hung in the air, Child. It was not a word of joy. In Dead Willow, in her situation, it was a sentence. It meant ruin.
Who? Someone murmured. Whose is it?
She's been hiding it. Mrs. Peabody announced, standing up and brushing the dust from her knees as if she had touched something unclean. The dress, the way she's been keeping to herself, she is ruined. The whispers started then, quick and venomous, the way a grass fire starts. They passed the verdict around the circle. Sinner, harlot, filth, the same words they had used for the painted women in the saloon. Only now they were aimed at one of their own. A shadow fell over the circle. It was long and black, and it silenced everyone. Reverend Amos Loudon stood over his niece. He was a tall man, thin as a rail, who dressed in black wool even in the suffocating heat. His face was all sharp angles and righteous certainty. He looked at Clara's still form, his lips a pale, straight line. "Move," he commanded. The circle parted. He did not kneel. He did not check if she was hurt. He waited. Clara's eyelids fluttered. The world came back to her in painful, bright pieces, the ring of faces, all staring, the sun hammering down, and her uncle, blocking the light, a figure of judgment. "Get up, Clara," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. It was the voice he used to command sinners to repent. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, the shame a hot flush on her neck. Her head throbbed. "What is this?" he asked. "What is this display?" She just looked at him, her vision still swimming. Mrs. Peabody, emboldened by the preacher's presence, stepped forward. "Reverend," she said, her voice dripping with false pity. "It is a delicate matter, but the girl, she is in a family way." The Reverend's eyes, which had been fixed on Clara, snapped to Mrs. Peabody. He did not question the woman's word. He accepted it, as if it were a truth he had been expecting. His gaze returned to Clara, and the coldness in it was worse than any summer heat. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging in like talons, and hauled her to her feet. The town watched. No one moved to help. "Who?" he demanded. The word was a slap. Clara stumbled, her knees weak. She could not look at him. She looked at the dust, at the boots of the men watching her. "Who did this to you, girl? Speak his name." She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. Tears began to well, hot and stinging, but she would not let them fall. To cry was to admit weakness, and weakness was an invitation for more cruelty. "Do not defy me," her uncle hissed, his grip tightening. "You will tell me who the father is." "No," she whispered. It was the first sound she had made. "What?" "No." She looked up. Not at him, but past him, toward the hills that shimmered in the heat. His hand flew, the crack of it echoing in the sudden silence of the square. His palm struck her cheek, snapping her head to the side. A collective gasp rose from the women, but it was a gasp of excitement, not horror. Clara tasted blood. She touched her lip, her eyes wide with shock. "You are a vessel of shame," the Reverend said, his voice dropping low, for her ears alone, though everyone could guess the sentiment. "You have brought filth into my home, onto the very steps of God's house." He turned, dragging her with him. "Go home," he shouted at the crowd. "Go pray for this town. It is drowning in sin." The crowd dispersed, but slowly, in small knots of 2 and 3, already telling the story, adding to it, making it fouler with every repetition. By the time the sun set, the entire town would know. Clara Loudon, the thief's sister, was a whore. As her uncle pulled her down the street, Clara's mind, seeking any escape, fled. It fled from the hot street to a cool evening, weeks ago. It fled from the stairs of the town to the quiet of the old Loudon hayloft, the one place she still went to feel close to her brother, the place that still smelled like her family, like home. She had been there, crying in the hay, her grief for Thomas a physical ache. She had been so lost in it. She had not heard him climb the ladder. He just appeared in the square of the loft door, a silhouette against the fading purple sky. Eli Granger. The town was scared of him. He was a former ranch hand, one who had worked their land when her father was still alive. He was a man of few words, and those he had were rough. He lived alone, up in the hills, in a cabin that was more of a shack, and he was marked. His face, the left side of it was a ruin of scar tissue, a slick, melted map of old pain. It pulled his eye down and twisted his mouth. The story was he had been caught in a barn fire, a fire that had also killed the Haynes brothers. The Haynes brothers were cruel men, known for abusing livestock and, it was whispered, local women. No one knew if Eli had set the fire to save himself or to deliver judgment. No one asked. They just stayed away. He was dangerous, half wild. That is what they said. He had stood there in the loft, just looking at her. He had not moved. He knew her from the ranch. He had worked with Thomas. She should have been scared. She was alone, with a man the town called a killer. But she was not scared. She was just tired. The grief was too big to make room for fear. She had not said anything. She just cried, her shoulders shaking. He moved then, slow, like he was calming a spooked horse. He sat in the hay, a good 10 feet away from her. He did not speak. He just sat, sharing the quiet. He pulled an apple from his coat and rolled it gently toward her. She had looked at it, then at him. His good eye was kind. The scarred side of his face was turned toward the shadows. She had crawled over to him. She had not known why. She just needed not to be alone. She had laid her head on his lap, still crying, expecting him to push her away, to say something rough. He had not. He had just frozen. His hand, calloused and hard, had lifted, hesitated, and then settled on her hair. It was awkward, gentle. That was all it was. At first, comfort, grief finding a place to rest. But grief is a hungry thing, and so is loneliness. She had looked up at him. He had looked down, and in the silence of the hayloft, with the smell of horses and her brother's memory all around them, something had broken. It was not love. It was something heavier. It was need. You weren't rough, she would tell him later. You just didn't say anything. The memory vanished as the door of the parsonage slammed shut, rattling the glass. Her uncle threw her into her small room. It was barely more than a closet, with a cot and a small washstand. The air was stale. You will stay here, he boomed, his face purple with rage. You will not eat. You will drink only water. You will pray to God to forgive the abomination you have become.
Uncle Amos, please,
she whispered, the fight gone out of her. Do not speak to me. You have shamed me. You have shamed the memory of your mother. You are your father's daughter. Through and through. Rotten. He slammed the door. She heard the metallic scrape of the key turning in the lock. She was alone. The sun went down. The room grew cold. Her hunger was a sharp, biting thing, but her thirst was worse. There was a pitcher of water, and she drank it all. But it did not help. Through the thin wall, she heard him. He was not in his room. He was in the parlor, on his knees. He was praying. His voice was not the measured, calm tone he used in the pulpit. It was loud, furious. He was shouting at God, demanding retribution. "Oh, Almighty Father, look upon this house of sin," he cried. "A harlot sleeps under my roof. She has lain with wickedness and brought forth corruption." Clara pressed her hands over her ears, but she could not block him out. "Cast the demon from her. Cleanse her with fire. Let her soul burn free of this filth. Burn it out of her. Lord, burn her clean." Burn. The word echoed in her head. Fire. She looked at her small, barred window. He was praying for fire. He was praying for her to be destroyed. He was not praying for her. He was praying for himself, for his own reputation. A new feeling pushed through the shame and the fear. It was cold and sharp. It was anger. She would not be his sacrifice. She would not be the town's entertainment. She would not let them burn this thing out of her. She went to the window. It was small, meant for air, not escape. The bars were old wood. She pushed. They were solid. She looked at the small pitcher on her washstand. It was heavy porcelain. She picked it up and, with all her strength, she smashed it against the wooden bars. The porcelain shattered, but the wood held. She did it again, using the heavy base. A crack! She hit it again. The wood splintered, groaned, and then broke free. She dropped the pitcher, her hands shaking. She looked at the opening. It was small. She would have to squeeze. She put her hands on the sill and pushed herself up. Her stomach, still small but thicker than it had been, scraped against the bottom edge. She writhed, kicking her legs, trying to get purchase on the outside wall. For a moment, she was stuck, half in, half out, a perfect target. Then she was through. She fell, tumbling 4 feet to the hard ground below. She landed on her side, the impact jarring every bone in her body. She lay there for a long moment, gasping. The night air was freezing. Winter was coming on fast in the high country. The wind was sharp, and it cut through her thin cotton dress. She got to her feet, wincing. Her hip ached. She looked back at the house. The light was still on in the parlor. Her uncle was still shouting at his God. She ran. She did not know where she was going. Not to the town. There was no one there who would take her in. She ran toward the only place that was not the town. She ran toward the hills. She scrambled through the dry brush at the edge of the parsonage, her dress catching on thorns. She crossed the creek, the icy water stealing her breath, soaking her skirt and boots. She kept moving, climbing the first rise, toward the dark line of trees that marked the beginning of the wilderness. Her body was shaking. It was not just the cold, it was shock, it was fear, and it was pain. A sharp cramp seized her belly, so intense it doubled her over. She cried out, a small, animal sound. She leaned against a scrub pine, breathing hard. It passed. She straightened up, her hand on her stomach. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. Please, not yet." She started walking again, faster now, desperate to get under the cover of the trees. The wind was louder here, howling down from the peaks. Another cramp hit. This one was worse. It felt like she was being torn in two. She sank to her knees. She looked down. In the pale moonlight, she saw it. A dark stain spreading on the inside of her thigh. Her skirt was wet, and it was not just from the creek. It was blood. The world tilted again, just as it had in the square. But this was not a faint. This was terror. She was losing the baby. She was alone, in the freezing dark, bleeding. "Help," she whispered, though there was no one to hear. "Please, somebody." She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She fell onto her side, curling into a ball, clutching her stomach. The pain was constant now, a deep, pulling ache. She was going to die out here, like her brother, alone. She did not know how long she lay there. The cold was making her numb. She was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Then, a shadow detached itself from the other trees. It was a man. He was tall, and he moved with a silence that was unnatural. She thought, for a moment, it was her uncle. She tried to scream, but her throat was too cold. The man stepped into the moonlight. She saw the ruined side of his face. It was Eli. He stopped 10 feet away, just as he had in the hayloft. He just stood there, watching her. He held a rifle in one hand. She could not read his expression. His good eye was narrowed. Taking in the scene, he saw her on the ground. He saw the way she was clutching herself. His gaze drifted down her legs, and even in the dark, he must have seen the blood. Clara tried to speak. Her lips were numb. She forced the words out, a feverish, broken whisper. "I can't," she gasped.
I can't hold it in anymore.
Eli Granger looked at her. His face, the scarred half in the hole, was a mask. He did not move. He stood there for a long time, a full minute. Clara could hear him breathing over the wind. He knew what this was. He knew what she was saying. The secret was out, and he knew better than anyone what the town would do. They had lynched her brother on suspicion. What would they do to the man who had ruined the preacher's niece? What would they do to the man they already called a killer? He was a man who lived on the edge of things, and she was asking him to step right into the fire. He looked back, down the hill, toward the faint, flickering lights of Dead Willow. He looked at the sky, as if an answer was written in the stars. Then he looked at her. He saw her, a girl no older than 20, bleeding in the dirt, abandoned by everyone. He hesitated. He weighed the cost. He weighed his life against hers. And then he moved. He slung the rifle over his shoulder. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He did not say a word. He did not offer comfort. He was not a man who knew how. He simply bent down and, with a grunt of effort, he picked her up. She was light in his arms, a bundle of wet cloth and shaking bones. She cried out when he lifted her, the pain in her belly flaring.
It hurts,
she whispered, burying her face in the rough wool of his coat. It smelled of pine smoke and iron, and him. He just grunted again, adjusting her weight. He turned his back on the town. He did not hesitate again. He began to walk, climbing the rocky incline, heading deep into the hills, toward the isolated cabin where no one would follow. The first flakes of snow began to fall, small and white, catching in Clara's hair, melting on Eli's scarred and silent face. Eli's cabin was not a home. It was a shelter, built to keep the wind out, and nothing more. The logs were rough-hewn, chinked with mud and grass. It was one room, dominated by a stone fireplace that took up most of the back wall. It smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and the faint, musky scent of a man living alone. But it was warm. He had a good fire going, blazing hot, fighting back the cold that was already seeping through the walls. He laid her on his cot. It was the only one, a narrow frame built into the wall, layered with musty blankets and a single worn-out bearskin. She sank into it, her body screaming in protest. The snow, which had started as gentle flakes, was now a driving white curtain outside the single, greased paper window. The wind was a living thing, a high, thin wail that promised a long siege. Clara gasped as another cramp seized her, sharper this time. She clutched the bearskin, her knuckles white. "The baby," she choked out, the fear tasting like metal. "It is coming. I am bleeding." Eli stood over her, a massive, dark shape against the firelight. He looked helpless, his hands, large, calloused, and stained, hanging at his sides. He was a man built for axes and rifles, not for this.
"The bleeding,"
he said, his voice a low rasp.
"Is it heavy?"
She could only nod, tears of pain and terror slipping from the corners of her eyes. "It will not stop." He moved then, his awkwardness turning into a clumsy purpose. He grabbed a bucket and went out into the swirling snow, coming back with it packed full. He set it near the fire to melt. He tore a strip from what looked like a clean, worn shirt, dipped it in the lukewarm water he kept in a barrel by the door, and handed it to her. "Clean yourself," he ordered, his voice rough, but not unkind. He turned his back to her, a gesture of respect that made her feel the shame of her body even more acutely. She did as he said, her hands trembling so badly she could hardly manage. The bleeding was there, dark and frightening, but it did not seem to be the flood she had feared. The cramps were real, but they were not constant. They came, twisted her insides, and then eased, leaving her shaking. When she was finished, she hid the rag under the blanket.
"Eli,"
she whispered. He turned around. The firelight played on his face, making the scarred side look like melted wax, the good side like carved stone. "It is slowing," she said, The pain, it comes and goes." He nodded, his relief almost invisible, just a slight easing of the tension in his shoulders. "That is the cold," he said, "and the fall. It is not its time." He went to the fire and dipped a tin cup into a pot hanging over the flames. He brought it to her. It was a thin, bitter tea made from pine needles or some other mountain green. "Drink." She sipped it. It was hot, and it warmed her all the way down. He stood and watched her, his good eye fixed on her face, making sure she drank it all. He did not know how to soothe with words, so he used what he had: hot tea, a warm fire. He took the empty cup and sat on a low, three-legged stool across the room, as far from her as he could get while still being near the fire. He picked up a piece of wood and his knife and began to whittle, the blade moving with a practiced, steady rhythm. And so the first night passed. They did not speak. The only sounds were the scrape of his knife, the howl of the storm, and the quiet, terrified breaths of Clara Loudon. The contractions faded with the warmth and the tea, leaving behind a dull ache and a profound exhaustion. She did not lose the child. Not that night. She just lay there, suspended between one life she had lost and another she could not imagine. The next days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through the window paper. The snow did not stop. It piled up against the cabin, burying the world in white, sealing them inside. Eli tended to her. It was a strange, silent dance of awkwardness. He would leave broth by the bed, or a piece of hardtack, and then retreat to his stool. Turning his back, he brought her water to wash, and always looked away, his face rigid with a discomfort that mirrored her own. Clara felt stripped bare. This man, this near stranger, was seeing her at her lowest. She was weak, she was dirty, and she was carrying a child that was not her husband's. She kept the blankets pulled up to her chin, as if she could hide her shame. She flinched every time he came near. She could not meet his eyes, not even his good one. She would look at his hands, or the floor, or the fire. And Eli, he spoke almost not at all. His silence was a wall as thick as the snow outside. He moved about the cabin, his presence filling the small space. He would check his traps near the door, skin a rabbit with quick, brutal efficiency, mend a piece of his tack. Sometimes, though, he would just sit. He would stare into the fire, his hands idle on his knees. And in those moments, Clara would watch him. The firelight would catch the ruined side of his face, and his good eye would go distant, lost. She saw him flinch once, though nothing had moved. He had been staring at the flames, and his hand, his left hand, the one on the same side as his scars, clenched so hard his knuckles went white, his breath hitched. He was seeing a different fire. The vision came to him, unwanted, as it always did, not the barn fire itself, but the smell of burning hay and horseflesh and something else, the screams, not just the animals, the Haynes brothers. He remembered the feel of the heat on his back as he ran. He remembered stumbling, falling, the burning rafter crashing down, pinning his arm, his face. He remembered the smell of his own skin cooking. The Haynes brothers had been at the saloon, bragging about what they had done to the Miller girl, how she had cried. Thomas, Clara's brother, had heard it. Thomas, young and full of righteous fire, had called them out. Eli had been there. He had pulled Thomas away, told him it was not their fight, that the Haynes were poison. "Then who will stop them? Eli?" Thomas had shouted, his face pale with fury. "You? Me? Or does everyone just look away?" Later, Eli had found Thomas in that barn, beaten near to death. The Haynes brothers were there, laughing, holding a hot branding iron, saying they were going to mark the boy for interfering. Eli had grabbed a lantern. He had not meant for the whole barn to go. He had not meant for all of it. He had just meant to stop them, to make them stop. But the fire had been so fast, so hungry. It had taken the Haynes brothers, the horses, And a piece of Eli, too. He jerked back to the present, the smell of wood smoke in his cabin pulling him from the smell of that other, sicker smoke. He looked at his scarred hand, then quickly tucked it out of sight. He glanced at Clara. She was watching him, her eyes wide and fearful in the dim light. He looked away, ashamed. He picked up his knife and went back to whittling. The wall of his silence built back up, stronger than before. On the third day, the snow eased, and a pale, watery sun lit the small room. Clara was stronger. The bleeding had stopped. She sat up on the cot, the bearskin around her shoulders. The silence had become its own kind of pain, a heavy blanket she had to push off. She looked at him. He was at the rough plank table, cleaning his rifle, his back to her.
"Eli," she said.
Her voice was hoarse. He stopped his work. He did not turn. "Ma'am." "Why did you help me?" He pushed a cleaning rag through the barrel, his movements measured. "No place for a person to be, in the cold."
"They will come for you,"
she said, her voice flat.
"My uncle, the town. They will say you took me. They will say—"
She could not finish. "Let them," he said.
"They will blame you for this."
She put a hand on her stomach. He turned then, his face half in shadow. "Does it matter? They blame me for most everything else." The air was still. She had to ask. She had to know if she was sharing this small, warm space with a killer, or a comforter, or both. "That night," she whispered, her hands twisting in the fur.
"The night Thomas died."
He went rigid.
"I came to the loft. I was so broken."
She looked down at her hands. "I did not know where else to go. You were the only one who was ever quiet with him, who looked at him like he was a man, not just a boy."
Eli said nothing.
He stared at the rifle parts on his table. "I came to you for comfort," she said, the tears starting again. "Quiet this time. And you gave it, but it was the night he was killed. I found out, the next morning. It all runs together. The grief. And you." She finally looked up at him. "You were not rough, Eli. You were not like the stories they tell. You just did not say anything. Not before, not after." His good eyes squeezed shut. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than the snow on the roof. He was haunted. He had held her that night, taken the only comfort a man and a woman can take. And it had been tangled up in death. He had not known if it was love, or just grief so deep it looked like love. He had not known what she wanted from him. He had only known she was broken, and he was lonely, and for 1 hour, they had not been those things. He swept the rifle parts into a rag, his hands shaking slightly. He stood up and went to the wall, grabbing an axe. "Stay by the fire," he said, his voice thick. He pulled on his coat and boots and plunged out into the snow, which was waist-deep in places. He did not come back for hours. Clara watched from the window, watching him attack a fallen pine tree, splitting logs with a fury that was frightening. He was not just cutting wood. He was fighting something. He was working the confusion and the guilt out of his body. When he returned, he was coated in snow, his breath coming in white clouds. He did not speak of what she had said. Instead, he dumped the wood by the fire, took a hammer and some old nails, and went to the corner of the cabin. There was a leak in the roof, a place where the snow melt dripped. He began to fix it. For the next 2 days, he worked. He repaired the roof. He re-chinked the logs near her cot where the wind whistled through. He took a small, broken crate and began to sand it, reinforcing it, shaping it. He never spoke of it, but Clara knew what he was making. It was a cradle, a small, crude box for a baby. He was making space for the child, but he never once spoke of staying. He never spoke of a future. He was a man building a fence, not a home. Clara felt a strange pull. He was a phantom, a scarred man the town despised. But in this cabin, he was solid. He was warmth and broth, and a silent presence that, unlike her uncle's, demanded nothing of her. While he was out checking his traps one afternoon, she felt strong enough to stand, to walk. The cabin was tiny. His life was laid bare. A bed, a table, a stool, a shelf. On the shelf, next to a tin of coffee and some dried beans, was a book. It was not a book. It was a sketchbook, the cover warped by water, the leather ties broken. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. It felt like a violation, like looking into his mind. She opened it. The pages were filled with charcoal and pencil. The first few were rough sketches of animals, a hawk in flight, its feathers detailed with impossible care, a deer, its eyes soft and wet. Then mountains, the peaks she could see from the window, drawn over and over, at sunrise, in shadow. Then she turned a page and her breath caught. It was her face. It was not a perfect likeness, but it was her. It was her, months ago, hanging laundry at her father's ranch. Her hair was loose, blowing in the wind. She was smiling, a real smile, one she had not felt in a long time. She turned another page. It was her again, in the hayloft. Looking out the door, another, just her hands, holding an apple. He had been watching her, for months, not with menace, but with a kind of desperate, quiet attention. This silent, scarred man, this man the world called half-wild, had been drawing her face with a delicacy that broke her heart. She was staring at the last drawing, her profile, her eyes closed. When the door creaked open, Eli stood there, a frozen rabbit in his hand. He saw the book in her lap. He did not move. He just looked at the book, then at her. The blood drained from his good cheek, leaving him pale. It was the most exposed she had ever seen him, more than his scars, more than his silence. Clara closed the book, her hands shaking.
"They are beautiful, Eli."
He dropped the rabbit on the floor with a thud. He walked to the table and gripped the edge of it, his back to her, his head down. He was breathing hard. "You should not have," he rasped. "That is private."
"Who taught you?"
she asked softly, ignoring his anger, her heart aching for him.
"Nobody, I just do it."
"You drew me," she said. He turned, his good eye blazing with a mix of shame and anger. "You were there. It is just lines on paper." "It is not," she said, standing, holding the book to her chest.
"You saw me."
They stared at each other. The space between them was electric. It was filled with everything they had not said. It was filled with the drawings, and the hayloft, and the baby, and the snow. The longing was a physical thing, a third person in the room. It was unbearable. She wanted to cross the room, to touch his good hand, to tell him he was not a monster. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her close, to hide his face in her hair and forget the barn, the town, the scars. Neither of them moved. The moment broke. Eli turned away, grabbing the rabbit and his knife. "The fire is low," he muttered, and began the task of skinning the animal, his movements jerky and angry. They did not speak of the sketchbook again, but something had changed. The shame had lessened, and the awareness had grown. They were no longer just a man and a woman in a storm. They were Eli and Clara. That evening, the quiet felt different. It was not empty, it was full. Clara sat by the fire, mending a tear in her dress with a needle and thread Eli had given her. He was on his stool, sharpening his axe head. The sound of the stone on the steel, a rhythmic shing, shing, shing. "Eli?" she asked, not looking up from her sewing. My brother, Thomas, did you love him?" It was a strange question, a word men did not use for other men, but it was the only word she had. Eli stopped sharpening. He stared at the blade in his hands. He thought of Thomas, of his quick laugh, his foolish, bright anger. He thought of the boy yelling at him. "Who will stop them, Eli?"
He set the axe and stone down. He looked into the fire, his voice so low she almost did not hear it. "He was braver than me," Eli whispered. Clara looked up. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the flames, and his good eye was wet. "He tried to stop them," Eli said, his voice raw. "The Haines. I told him to let it be. I told him it was not his fight. He did not listen. He was good. And I told him to be a coward, like me." He stood up abruptly and put on his coat. "Where are you going?" "The storm." She said it was dark. "Need to check the perimeter," he mumbled, grabbing his rifle. "Snow is stopping. Animals will be moving." He left. Clara sat alone, the warmth of the fire on her face. He was braver than me. He had loved Thomas. He had loved him and felt he had failed him. She sat there for a long time, listening to the cabin settle. The silence he left behind was awful. It was empty again. She lay down on the cot, pulling the bearskin tight. She thought of her brother, of the sketchbook, of the cradle in the corner. She cried. She cried for Thomas, who was brave and dead. She cried for Eli, who was alive and haunted. And she cried for herself, because for the first time, she did not know which of them was in more pain. She cried herself to sleep. Outside, far down the slope, a sound cut the frozen night. It was not the wind, it was a howl, low, long, and hungry. A second howl answered it, then a third. Eli, standing watch on a ridge above the cabin, heard them. He chambered around in his rifle. The wolves were circling. They smelled the cabin, the smoke, the life inside. They were testing the boundaries. He stared into the darkness, his scarred face grim. The snow had stopped, but the danger had not. It was just changing shape. The wolves were gone by morning. The world was blue-white and silent, the sky a clear, cold gray. Clara, feeling the need to move, to breathe air that was not thick with smoke and confinement, pulled Eli's heavy coat over her shoulders and stepped outside. The cold hit her face like a slap. The snow was deep, drifted up to her knees, but it was the surface of it that made her stop. There, near the woodpile, just at the edge of the clearing. Hoof prints. They were not Eli's. He had no horse. These were from a single rider, shod. The prints were sharp, pressed deep, meaning the rider had sat for a while, just watching. They were already blurring at the edges, frosted with new ice, meaning they were from the night. The rider had come while they slept, had listened to the wolves, had maybe even seen Eli on the ridge. Clara's hand went to her stomach. She backed away, stumbling into the cabin, kicking the door shut. Eli looked up from the fire. He saw her face, white as the snow outside. "What is it?" "Someone was here," she whispered, pulling the coat tighter. "A horse, watching the cabin." Eli was on his feet in an instant. He did not go to the door. He went to his rifle, which leaned against the wall. He picked it up, his movements fluid. No hesitation. He checked the breech, his scarred face impassive, but his good eye was cold, hard as iron. Clara sank onto the stool, her mind racing. The hoofprints, the town, her uncle. A memory of his voice, loud and furious, echoed in her head. Clearer than the sound of the wind. The words he had shouted in the parlor, the ones that had driven her out the window. "Bring back the girl, or we burn the sin out of the hills." They were not just watching, they were hunting. "He knows," she said, her voice shaking. "My uncle, he knows I am here." "Likely," Eli said. He pulled a small tin from his shelf. It held bullets. He began, with slow, deliberate movements, to load the rifle. He pushed each brass cartridge into the magazine. The click-clack of the metal, the only sound in the room. It was a sound of finality. He finished loading and set the rifle on the table. Then he looked at her. "You need to know how," he said. "Know how what?" "To use this." He tapped the rifle's wooden stock. Clara recoiled. "No, I cannot. I have never held a gun." "You will," he said. It was not a request. "I am one man, and I cannot be in all places. If they come, and I am not here, you will." He picked up the rifle and held it out to her. "But first, take it." She looked at the dark, oiled wood, the long, cold barrel. It was a thing of death. It was the kind of thing that had killed her brother. "I cannot, Eli." "Take it, Clara." His voice was low, but it held a command she could not refuse. Her hands, trembling, reached out and took the weapon. It was impossibly heavy. It felt wrong in her arms, cold and balanced for a strength she did not possess. "Put the stock to your shoulder," he ordered. He moved behind her. She flinched as he reached around her, his body close, his arm brushing her side. He did not seem to notice. His hand, the scarred one, settled on her shoulder, pushing it firm. "Hard," he said, "or it will break your bone." He put his good hand over hers on the trigger guard. "You look down the barrel. You line up the notch at the back with the post at the front. You put the post on what you mean to hit." She tried. She squinted, her eye watering from the strain. The barrel ached in her arms. "It wavers. I cannot hold it steady." "You will," he said. "Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull." "I do not want to," she whispered, tears of frustration welling. "I do not want to kill anyone." His hand tightened on her shoulder. His voice was rough, close to her ear. "It is not about wanting. It is about living. They will not come here to talk. Clara, they will come to take you. They will come to take the child. They will come to kill me. You fire this or you let them." The choice was that simple, that brutal. "Point it at the knot," he said, nodding toward a dark knot in the log wall across the cabin. "Fire it." "Inside." "Fire it." She closed her eyes. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small space. It was a physical blow, a punch of sound and force. The rifle kicked back, not against her shoulder, which she had failed to hold firm, but against her upper arm, a brutal, sharp pain. She screamed, dropping the gun, which clattered to the floor. The cabin was filled with blue smoke, the sharp, sulphurous smell of burnt powder. A new hole, splintered and raw, was a foot to the left of the knot. Clara was crying, clutching her arm, her ears ringing. Eli picked up the rifle. He looked at the hole, then at her. He did not scold her. He did not comfort her. "You fired," he said, as if it were a simple fact. "Next time, hold it tighter, and keep your eyes open." He leaned the rifle against the wall near her cot. "It is loaded," he said. "Do not touch it, unless you mean to use it." He went back to his side of the room, leaving her alone with the smell of gunpowder and the terrible, aching knowledge of what he expected her to do. That night, the wind returned. It was not the high wail of before. This was a low, heavy roar, a freight train of a storm that descended from the peaks and buried them. For 2 days, the world outside was nothing but a white, howling chaos. The snow piled up, covering the window, plunging the cabin into a dim, gray twilight even at midday. The hoofprints were gone, but the fear remained. And with the storm, their small world shrank until it was just the few feet of floor between the cot and the fireplace. The wood ran low. Eli had a good pile, but it was meant for one man, not for keeping a fire blazing day and night to fight off a blizzard and keep a pregnant woman warm. He started rationing it. The fire, which had been their roaring defender, was reduced to a sullen, smoky glow. The cold seeped in. It was a damp, biting chill that got into their bones. Then the food ran out. The last of the dried rabbit was gone. The coffee tin was empty. The sack of beans held only a handful. Eli boiled them into a thin, watery broth that did not touch the sides of their hunger. They were trapped, cold, and starving. The world was reduced to basic animal needs, and their bodies, which they had kept so carefully separate, were forced closer. There was only one source of heat left: each other. The first night of the real cold, Eli had laid the bearskin over her, then taken the two thinnest, most ragged blankets for himself on the floor, near the fire. Clara watched him in the dim light. He was shivering, his back to her, curled as tight as he could get. He would not survive the night like that, not without the fire, and she would not survive it without him. "Eli," she said, her voice small. He did not answer. He was pretending to be asleep. "Eli, you will freeze." "I am fine." His voice was a low growl. "You are not. You are shaking. Get on the cot." He was still. "No." "Do not be a fool," she said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. It is just for warmth. It is survival. What does modesty matter if we are both dead by morning?" He did not move for a long time. Then, with a sigh that sounded like defeat, he stood up. He did not look at her. He brought his thin blankets and laid them on top of the bearskin, on the side of the cot nearest the wall. He lay down on his back, his hands crossed on his chest, as stiff and cold as a corpse in a coffin. Clara lay beside him. The space between them was only inches, but it felt like a canyon. She could feel the cold radiating off his body, but she could also feel the faint, solid presence of him. They lay there, side by side, not touching, staring up at the dark, smoky ceiling, listening to the storm try to tear the roof off. They passed 2 days like that, huddled under the same pile of furs, their bodies aching with hunger, the cold making them weak. The proximity was a new kind of torture. She could smell the pine smoke on his skin, feel the heat he generated. He could smell her, the faint, clean scent of soap and woman. They did not speak. They just endured. But the pressure was building. The fear of the men outside, the hunger inside, the intimacy of their survival. It was all winding tighter and tighter. On the third night of the blizzard, the fire was almost out. It was just a pile of red embers, giving no heat, only a faint, demonic glow. The last of the wood was gone. The cabin was plunged into a desperate, penetrating cold. Clara was shaking. She could not stop. Her teeth chattered, a rhythm of misery in the dark. The hunger was a dull, constant ache. The baby was a heavy, cold weight inside her, and Eli was a silent statue beside her. Something in her snapped. It was not a reasoned thought. It was a crack in the ice. All the fear, all the shame, all the desperate, unspoken longing came rushing up. She was tired of the silence. She was tired of being a burden. She was tired of this man who saved her life but would not look at her. She sat up, pushing the heavy furs away. "Clara, lie down. You will lose the heat." His voice was rough from the dark. "Why?" she shouted, her voice raw and sudden. "Why are you doing this?" He was silent. "Why did you bring me here? To let me freeze? To watch me starve?" She was sobbing now, the tears hot on her frozen cheeks. "You feed me, you keep me warm. You build a cradle for my baby, but you will not even look at me. You hide in your silence." "There is nothing to say." "There is!" she screamed. She hit the cot with her fist. "There is everything to say. You sit there like a stone, and I do not know. I do not know if you hate me. I do not know if you pity me. I do not know if you are just doing this because you felt you had to." She turned on him, a dark shape against the darker wall. "That night in the loft, you drew my picture. You watched me, and then that night, you touched me. And now you act as if I am a disease." "Clara, stop." "No, I will not stop." She was hysterical, the hunger and cold making her reckless. "Just say it. Say you did not want me. Say it was a mistake. Say you regret it. Just say something. Eli, say you look at me and you feel nothing." He did not move. "Say it," she shrieked, hitting his shoulder, her blows weak and frantic. Say I am just a whore, like my uncle said. Say it! He caught her wrists. His grip was iron. He did not hurt her, but he held her, stopping her. The sudden contact, skin on skin in the freezing dark, silenced her. He held her there for a long moment. She was breathing in ragged, broken gasps. "You are cold," he whispered. It was the only thing he could find to say. He pulled her down, not away, but toward him. He pulled her against his chest and threw the heavy furs back over both of them. She was stiff in his arms, her body rigid with shock and anger, but he just held her. His arms were like steel bands around her, and he was so warm. His body, even in the cold, was a furnace. He tucked her head under his chin, his hand, the scarred one, pressing her face against the rough wool of his shirt. She wept. She wept out all the fear, all the loneliness, all the shame. She wept into his neck, her body shaking apart. He just held her. He did not say, "It is all right." He did not say, "Do not cry." He just held her, absorbing the storm that was inside her. When the sobs finally quieted, leaving only shudders, she tilted her head back. She could not see his face in the dark, only the outline of it. "Eli," she whispered. "I know," he breathed. He lowered his head. His lips found hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not soft. It was clumsy and desperate and freighted with all the things they could not say. It tasted of salt from her tears and smoke and the cold metal of hunger. She kissed him back, her hands, still trapped by his, moving to clutch his shirt. It was a kiss of survival, a kiss that said, "I am alive. You are alive. We are here." It deepened. The desperation turned into something else, the need that had lived between them, unspoken, in the sketchbook, in the shared warmth, finally broke free. He moved, shifting them on the narrow cot, his body covering hers. A welcome, heavy weight. His hands moved from her wrists to her face, his calloused thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. They made love. It was not like the stories. It was not perfect. It was slow and quiet and fumbling in the freezing dark. It was awkward and real. It was two people, stripped bare of everything but need, finding the only warmth left in the world. It was a promise made in the dark, in a language without words. It was not about sin or salvation. It was just real. Afterward, she did not pull away. She could not. She curled against his chest, her face pressed into his neck, and she wept again. But this time, it was a different kind of tears. It was a release, a quiet, breaking weep for everything lost, and for the one small, damaged thing she had just found. He held her. He did not let go. And for the first time since her brother died, Clara Loudon did not feel alone. The storm broke in the early morning. A pale, sick light filled the cabin, revealing the two of them, tangled in the furs, their faces streaked with salt and sleep. Clara woke first. She was warm, truly warm. His arm was heavy across her waist, his body a solid line against her back. The world was quiet. Then she felt it. It was not like the cramps before. This was different. A low, deep pulling, a tightening in her very core. She held her breath, waiting. It seized her, made her gasp, and then, slowly, it released. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the blizzard, what it was. She pulled away from Eli, gently, her movement stiff. He woke the instant she moved, his eyes snapping open. He saw her face. "What is it?" "It is time," she whispered, her hand on her belly. "The baby. It is coming." The peace of the night shattered. Eli was out of the cot in a second, pulling on his boots. The fire was dead. The cabin was an icebox. "I need," Clara began, her mind racing. "Water, hot water, and cloths." Eli looked at the empty wood box, at the bucket of ice, at her. His face was a mask of grim resolve. The storm has passed. I can get wood.
There is no time, Eli,
she cried, as another contraction rolled through her, stronger this time. She bent over, groaning. He looked at her, then at the door. He was trapped. He could not leave her, but he could not help her without fire, without water.
Mrs. Davies,
Clara gasped, remembering the woman from the town square.
She is a midwife. She delivered my brother.
The town? Eli's voice was harsh. You want me to go to the town?
She would help. I know she would. She has to.
Clara was desperate.
Please, Eli, I cannot do this alone.
He looked at her, his face torn. To go to Dead Willow was to walk into the wolf's den. They were watching. They would be waiting. He knew it. She saw the hesitation.
Eli, please.
He grabbed his coat. He took his rifle. Bar the door behind me, he said. Where are you going? You said you needed a midwife. I will bring her.
Eli, no, they will kill you.
Bar the door. He plunged out into the snow, which was drifted high against the cabin. He fought his way through it, to the small, hidden lean-to where he kept his one secret, an old, half-starved Mustang he had saved from the wild. He had no saddle, just a blanket. He threw it on, hauled himself onto the horse's back, and kicked it into a desperate run, breaking a trail through the massive drifts. He would not go to the town. He knew a woman, old Mary, who lived in a dugout 5 miles up the canyon. She knew herbs. She knew birth. He rode like a man possessed, the horse struggling, the wind raw. He did not see the 2 riders, hunkered down in the pines 100 yards from his trail, until it was too late. They had been waiting. They had seen the hoof prints he had left, checking his perimeter. They had seen the smoke from his chimney. They had been waiting for him to break cover. They rode out, blocking his path. It was Mr. Sloan, the blacksmith, and another man, Jed Miller.
That is far enough, Granger,
Sloan called, his rifle level. Eli pulled his horse up. Get out of my way, Sloan. The preacher wants the girl, Jed said, spitting tobacco. We are here to take her back. She is in labor, Eli growled, his hand moving toward his own rifle. She needs help.
She needs cleansing,
Sloan said. Get off the horse. I am not letting you near her. Eli kicked the Mustang, trying to charge between them. Sloan's rifle cracked. It was not aimed at Eli, but at the horse. The animal screamed, its front leg buckling, and went down, throwing Eli into a deep drift. He came up, roaring, bringing his rifle to bear. But they were on him. Sloan brought the butt of his own gun down on Eli's head. The world exploded in white light. He fell. They did not stop. They kicked him, their heavy boots thudding into his ribs, his back. That is for the Haynes brothers, you bastard, Miller hissed, kicking him in the stomach.
Is he dead?
Sloan asked, breathing hard. Miller prodded Eli with his boot. He was limp, blood staining the snow under his head. The scarred side of his face was a purple, swollen ruin.
Close enough. The cold will finish him.
Let us roll him in the gulch. The wolves will take care of the rest. They dragged his unconscious body and rolled it down a steep, rocky embankment where he came to rest, half buried in a drift, as still as death. Now, Sloan said, wiping his hands.
Let us go get the harlot.
Back in the cabin, Clara had barred the door. She waited. She listened. The wind was the only sound. Another contraction hit. It dropped her to her knees. This was not a pull. This was a vice of fire, squeezing her, tearing her. She screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the thick log walls. He was not coming back. She knew it. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew the baby was coming. She was alone. She crawled to the fireplace, with shaking hands. She used the last of the kindling, a few splinters of wood, to start a tiny, pathetic fire. She put the bucket of snow as close to it as she dared. She found Eli's knife, the one he used for skinning. She found the tin pot. She would have her boiling water. She dragged the bearskin to the fire, her body racked with pain. She lay down, her back against the cold stones, and looked at the barred door. She was trapped. She was alone, and the pain was coming again, harder this time. Clara Loudon threw her head back and screamed, not for help, but in raw, animal defiance. Pain is a red world. For Clara, it had no beginning and no end. It was just a space she lived in. The tiny fire in the hearth was a distant, blurry star. The walls of the cabin seemed to be breathing, closing in and then pulling away. The contractions were not waves. They were mountains. She would be dragged up one side, screaming into the bearskin, her body arching off the floor, and then plunged down the other side into a valley of shivering exhaustion, just long enough to see the next peak coming for her. She was alone. That fact was colder than the floor. Eli was not coming back. He was dead or captured. The men who had been watching, the men with the horses, had found him. She was alone with this terrible, tearing thing that was demanding its way into the world. "I cannot," she whimpered, her voice a dry rasp. She had screamed herself hoarse hours ago. "I cannot do this." But the body did not listen to the mind. It had its own brutal business. She had managed to get the pot of melted snow to a weak simmer before the pain took over. Eli's skinning knife was on the floor beside her, its blade catching the dim firelight. It was all she had. She lost track of time. Day bled into a night she only knew by the cabin's deepening gloom, and then back into a gray, hopeless dawn. She drifted in and out of consciousness, waking only when the pain ripped her back. She was bleeding. She could feel the warm, wet soak of it beneath her, and it terrified her. She was dying. She was sure of it. Then, a new, agonizing pressure, a feeling of being split in two, a fire moving down, down, down. She gave one last, broken scream, a sound that was not human, and bore down, pushing against the pain, pushing against the end of the world, and then silence. The pain receded, leaving her hollowed out, floating. The only sound was her own ragged breathing. It was over. For a moment, she thought she had died, but the cold was still there, a sharp bite on her wet cheeks. A small, wet sound, a gurgle, a tiny cough. She raised her head, an effort that cost her everything. There, in the bloody mess of her skirts and the fur, was a thing, small, purple, and terrifyingly still. "No," she breathed. She reached out, her hand shaking so badly she could barely guide it. She touched it. It was warm. She grabbed the knife. She did not know how. She only knew what she had seen on the farm, with calves and lambs. She found the cord, thick and blue, and sawed at it with the blade, tears of weakness streaming down her face. She tied it, as she had seen her mother do, with a piece of thread pulled from her own ragged hem. It was still not moving. "Breathe," she begged. "Please, breathe." She pulled the small body onto her chest, the skin sticky and hot against her own. She rubbed its back, her motions clumsy, frantic. "Breathe! Oh, God, please, breathe!" She lowered her head and, remembering a story her father had told of a drowned calf, she put her mouth over the tiny, still mouth and nose and blew, a small puff of her own exhausted air. A gasp, a tiny, shuddering intake of breath, then a cry. It was not a strong cry. It was a thin, reedy wail, like a kitten in the cold, but it was life. She collapsed back, pulling the baby tight, covering it with the bearskin, with her own body. "You are here," she wept. "You are here." The baby was a girl. Clara knew it, somehow. She looked at the small, wrinkled face, the eyes squeezed shut. the mouth open in that tiny, protesting cry. She had thought of names, bitter names, like sorrow or silence. But holding this life, this impossible thing that had come from so much pain, there was only one word that came to her. "Grace," she whispered, her lips cracked. "Your name is Grace." She held her daughter, and the world began to go dark at the edges. The fire was just embers now. The cold was a heavy, sinking thing. The bleeding, she could feel, had not stopped. It was flowing out of her, her life, her warmth. "I am sorry," she whispered to the crying infant. "I am so sorry." She closed her eyes. The crying faded. The cold faded. There was only the dark and the deep, deep quiet. He woke to pain. That was the first thing, a white-hot spike behind his good eye. The second thing was the cold. It was in his bones, a solid thing, as if his blood had turned to ice. Eli did not know where he was. He was on his back, his face pressed into snow. He tried to move, and a universe of agony exploded in his chest. His ribs, they were broken. He could feel the sharp edges grate. He opened his good eye. The world was a blur of white and black, snow, and the rock walls of a gulch. He remembered the horse, Sloane, Miller, the harlot. Clara, the thought of her, alone, in labor, was a spur that drove through the pain. He tried to sit up. The world spun, and he fell back, vomiting into the snow, his whole body convulsed with the effort. He lay there, shaking, tasting bile. He was going to die here. They had left him for dead. "She is in labor." He rolled onto his stomach, groaning, the sound torn from his throat. He put his hands under him. They were numb, white. He pushed. The pain in his ribs made him see black. He collapsed. He tried again. This was not about him. It was about her. Bar the door. He had told her to bar the door. Sloane and Miller were going to the cabin. Rage, cold and pure, gave him what strength could not. He got to his knees. He could not stand. His head was split open, his leg was twisted, and his chest was on fire. So he crawled. He hauled himself up the side of the gulch, his hands digging into the frozen snow, his boots finding no purchase. It took him an hour of pulling, sliding back and pulling again, every movement a fresh hell. When he reached the top, he lay in the snow, his lungs burning, tasting blood. His horse was gone. His rifle was gone. He looked at the sky. It was late afternoon. He had been out for hours. They were already there. They had her. He began to walk. It was not walking. It was a stumble, a lurch, a fall. He would go 10 feet and fall, lie in the snow until the rage built up again, then push himself up and go another 10. The sun set. The temperature plummeted. The wolves began to howl, closer this time. He did not care. He had one thought. Clara. Night came. He did not know how long he walked. He fell into drifts. He crawled over rocks. His body was a machine that was broken, but it had not been told to stop. He followed the line of the trees, his own tracks from that morning long since blown away. He did not know when the first day passed. He just knew the sun came up, and it was a terrible, bright pain on the snow. He was half blind, his face a swollen mass of frozen blood and bruises. The scarred side was numb, a piece of dead meat. He found a rabbit in one of his snares. He did not have his knife. He tore it apart with his bare, frozen hands and ate the raw, bloody meat. The strength it gave him was small, but it was enough. He kept moving. The cabin? He had to get to the cabin. He did not know if it was the second day or the third when he finally saw it. He came over the last ridge, and the cabin was still there. It was not burned. But there was no smoke from the chimney. This new fear was worse than the pain. He ran, or his body's best imitation of it. He fell down the last slope, sliding, tumbling, and crashed against the door. It was barred. "Clara!" he yelled. His voice was a broken croak. "Clara!" No answer. He threw his body against the door. The bar held. He did it again, his shoulder screaming. The pain from his ribs nearly made him pass out. "Clara!" He saw the window, the one she had escaped from at the parsonage. It was just paper. He punched his fist through it, the frozen paper and thin wood cutting his skin. He reached inside, fumbling in the dark, and found the bar. He lifted it. The door swung open. The cabin was a tomb. It was colder inside than out. The fire was long dead, a pile of gray ash. And on the floor, on the bare skin, was a mound. He stumbled forward, his heart stopping. It was Clara. She was pale, her skin a waxy, bluish white. Her eyes were closed. She was not moving. She was covered in frozen, dark blood. He fell to his knees beside her. "No, no, no, no!" He put his frozen fingers on her neck. He waited. Nothing. He pressed harder, desperate. A flicker, a movement so faint, it was almost not there. A pulse, slow, thready. She was alive. Then he heard it. A small sound, a faint mew. From beneath the furs she was clutching. He pulled the bearskin back, curled on her stomach, wrapped in a piece of bloody cloth. Was a baby. It was blue with cold, its limbs stiff, but it was alive. It was moving. He had no time for thought. He had no time for pain. He went to the fireplace. He used his last strength to haul himself back out, breaking branches from the woodpile with his bare hands. He brought them in, splintered them with a rock from the hearth. He used his flint and steel, his hands so numb he could barely hold them. It took him agonizing minutes. A spark, a wisp of smoke, a tiny, fragile flame. He fed it, he nursed it, blowing on it until his lungs ached. The flame caught. He piled on more wood, reckless, needing the heat now. He filled the pot with snow and hung it. He went back to Clara. He lifted her. She was a dead weight. He carried her to the cot, away from the blood, and piled every blanket, every skin, on top of her. He took the baby. It was so small. It fit in one of Lys' ruined hands. He unwrapped it, chafed its tiny, frozen limbs, his rough hands moving with a desperate gentleness. He wrapped it in the cleanest rag he could find and tucked it inside his own shirt, against his skin, against the faint warmth his body still held. He sat by the fire, holding the child, feeding the flames, melting the snow. When the water was warm, he forced it, drop by drop, past Clara's pale lips. She swallowed. A reflex. He did it again. He spent the rest of that day and night reviving them. He made a thin, weak broth from the scraps of the rabbit. He fed it to Clara. He dipped his finger in the warm water, sweetened with the last pinch of sugar he owned, and let the baby suck on it. He did not sleep. He did not tend to his own wounds. He just sat, a bloody, broken man, holding a new life against his chest, watching the woman and the fire, fighting back the cold, fighting back the death that still sat in the corners of the room. By the next night, she was awake. Her eyes opened, and they were clear. She saw the fire. She saw him. Then, a look of pure terror. "The baby," she breathed. Eli, who had been dozing on his stool, jerked awake. He moved, his body screaming at him, and showed her the bundle in his arms. The baby was no longer blue. It was pink and sleeping. Clara wept, silent tears that ran into her matted hair. Eli stood, awkward, the baby cradled against his chest. He did not know what to do, so he just stood there, letting her cry. Later, when she had strength, she told him, "Grace." He nodded. "Grace." He sat by the fire, the baby asleep on his chest. The cabin was warm again. The world outside was quiet. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the small hand that had curled around the wool of his shirt. He had faced war. He had faced fire. He had faced Sloan and Miller and the cold. He had never been so scared in all his life. This small thing, this Grace, was more terrifying than all of it. He could not fight for it. He could only hold it. Clara watched him from the cot. The firelight played on his face. She saw the new bruises, the split lip, the swollen, purple ruin of his eye. His good eye was fixed on the infant, and his expression was one of such profound, naked terror that it made her heart ache. She smiled, a weak, pulling thing. "You look terrified," she whispered. His head snapped up. He looked at her, then back at the baby. "It is small," he managed to say. "It does not feel solid." "She is," Clara said. "She is stronger than she looks." "Like her mother," he said, his voice low. The quiet that fell between them was not empty. It was full. It was the quiet of two people who had been to the edge of the world and pulled each other back. But the world was still there. They were safe for now, healed by the deep snow. But the snow would melt. A few days later, Eli, his ribs taped with strips of cloth, his face a map of fading bruises, came back from a scouting trip. He said nothing. He just sat at the table and began cleaning his rifle, the one he had taken from Jed Miller. He had gone back to the gulch. He had found his horse, dead, but he had found the rifle, dropped in the snow. "What is it?" Clara asked. She was sitting up, nursing Grace. Sloan and Miller went back to town. He said, told everyone the snow was too deep. They did not come to the cabin. They were scared. "Then we are safe." "No." He pushed a rag through the barrel. "They told the town I took you, that I beat them and ran. And your uncle, he is using it. He is telling them you are possessed, that the child is an abomination, that I am the devil who claimed you." Clara's blood ran cold. This was worse than shame. This was a hunt. "He is rallying them," Eli said, his voice flat. "He is quoting scripture, fire and brimstone. He wants to reclaim you, to cleanse the hills." Clara looked down at Grace. She had to protect her. "Then we run," she said, her voice hard. "As soon as I can walk, we pack what we have, and we go to Colorado, we disappear." Eli stopped cleaning. He looked at her, his good eye holding hers. "No," he said. "What do you mean, no?" Her voice rose, sharp with fear. "They will kill us, Eli. They will kill you, and they will take my baby." "They will," he agreed, his voice quiet. "And if we run, they will hunt us. And if they do not find us, that shadow will follow us. It will sit at our table every night for the rest of our lives. You will look at me and see the man who made you run. I will look at you and see the woman I could not protect. And the child, she will grow up a fugitive." "So we stay?" she cried. "We stay here and let them burn us out? Let them hang you?" "We stay," he said, standing. He walked to the window and looked out at the white, empty world. "We stay, and we face them. We do not let them chase us. We show them they have no power here, or it will haunt us forever. We stop it. Here, now." She saw the set of his jaw. He was not the man who had hesitated in the tree line. He was not the man who had hidden in his silence. He was a man who had made a choice. "How?" she whispered. "You and me, against a whole town." "We make the stand here," he said, turning back to her. "This is my land. I know every rock, every tree. They come here. They come on my terms." And so they began. While Clara regained her strength, Eli worked. He did not just chop wood, he built defenses. He braced the door with a heavy iron bar. He set deadfalls and snares on the main paths, hidden traps that would not kill, but would maim, or at least warn them. He carved out an escape route under the back wall, behind the woodpile, a low tunnel that led to a deep ravine. He cached food, smoked rabbit, dried berries, and flour he had hiked 10 miles to a hidden trapper's post to trade for. Clara's job was the rifle. Every day, as soon as she could stand, Eli took her out, You flinched, he would say, his voice flat. Do it again. She hated it. The kick of it still hurt her. The noise made Grace cry, but she thought of her uncle's face. She thought of Sloane's boot. She thought of them touching her child. She stopped flinching. Again, Eli would say. She learned to breathe out, to squeeze, to make her world narrow down to the front sight and the target. A tin can, a knot on a tree. Again. The crack of the rifle became a daily sound. She learned to reload, her fingers stiff with cold, fumbling with the cartridges. Faster, he said. I am trying. Try harder. They will not wait. She did. Her shoulder turned a deep, bruised purple. Her hands grew calloused. One day, she hit the can, dead center, from 50 yards. She did it again and again. She lowered the rifle, the smell of gunpowder sharp in her nose. She looked at Eli. He nodded. Just once. Good, he said. That night, as they sat by the fire, the cabin secure, the preparations made, the silence felt different. It was the calm before the battle. Grace was asleep in the cradle he had finished. Eli, Clara said, her voice quiet. She was cleaning the rifle herself, her movements now sure. You have to tell me. He looked up. He was carving a small piece of wood, a bird, for Grace. Tell you what, the truth about Thomas. I know what you told me, that he was braver, but I do not know what happened. Not really. I need to know. If I am to stand with you, I need to know it all. Eli set the carving down. He stared at his hands. The scarred one, the good one. He had not spoken of this to a living soul. He found out, Eli began, his voice a low rasp, about the Haynes brothers, what they did to the Miller girl, and others. He was like a fire, your brother, all bright light and heat. He wanted to go to the sheriff. I told him the sheriff was bought. He wanted to call them out. I told him they were snakes, and they would kill him. He paused, his throat working. He would not listen. He went to their barn, to confront them, I do not know, to stop them. I followed him. I was late. I was scared. I hid outside, in the brush. I watched. His good eye squeezed shut. They were waiting for him. They beat him. They hurt him, and he kept fighting. He grabbed a pitchfork. He was just a boy. He got one of them, in the arm. And then Robert Haynes. He pulled his pistol, and he shot him. Clara made a small, strangled sound. She put her hand over her mouth. He just shot him, Eli whispered. In the chest. Thomas, he just looked surprised. Then he fell. They laughed. They poked him with a boot. They were going to pin a thief sign on him. Said he was trying to steal their horses. And you, Clara said, her voice shaking. You were there. You watched. I watched, Eli admitted, his self-loathing a raw wound. I was a coward. I watched them kill your brother. I did not move. He picked up the carving knife, his knuckles white. But then they went back inside the barn. They lit a lantern. They were drinking, laughing about it, and something in me broke. The coward part, it just burned away. All I could see was Thomas, lying in the dirt. All I could hear was him yelling at me. Who will stop them? Eli. So I did. He looked at her, his good eye blazing with the memory of the fire. I barred the door. From the outside, they had a stack of hay by the wall. I took their lantern, the one they were drinking by, and I threw it. I threw it right into the hay. He was breathing hard now. I did not kill your brother, Clara, but I did not stop them from doing it. I just settled the account. I sat outside and I listened to them scream. I did not feel a thing. Not until the roof came in, and a beam hit me. I burned, but I did not feel it. I felt quiet. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the fire crackling in the hearth. Clara stared at him. Her face was pale, stone. She had pictured 1,000 things, but not this. Not this terrible, righteous, awful truth. He was a killer, but he had not killed her brother. He had avenged him. He waited. He expected her to scream, to call him a monster, to pick up the rifle and point it at him. He deserved it. She put the rifle down. She slowly, deliberately, reached across the small space between them. Her hand, now rough and calloused, covered his, the one holding the knife. He flinched, but she held on. He looked at her, his eye wide, questioning. "You did what no one else would," Clara said, her voice low, but steady as a rock. "My father, the sheriff, the whole town, they all looked away. You did not." She squeezed his hand. "That is why I trusted you in the loft. I did not know why, but I knew you were not like them. You were not a coward." "I was," he choked out. "I let him die." "You were human," she said. "And then you were something else." She looked down at their joined hands. "It does not matter. Not now. They are coming for us, for all of us, and we will face them." Eli looked at her, at this woman who had survived the town, and her uncle, and childbirth alone in the cold. He looked at her, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel like a monster. He did not feel like a coward. He just felt known. He nodded. He turned to look out the window, his hand still in hers. The moon was high, casting a bright, cold light on the endless snow. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. Then, far down the slope, at the very edge of the tree line, he saw it. A spark, then another and another. A line of them, moving through the trees, coming up the hill. "Clara," he said, his voice grim. He pulled his hand free and picked up his rifle. She stood beside him at the window. The torches, they were bobbing in the dark. A line of angry, yellow eyes. They were coming. The torches were closer now. They were not just sparks, but ugly, ragged flames, held by dark shapes moving through the trees. They came up the hill like a sickness, a slow, crawling fire. Eli stood at the window, his rifle in his hand. Clara stood beside him, her own rifle held tight, the stock cold against her cheek. She could hear them, the crunch of boots on the frozen snow, a low murmur of voices, not distinct words, just the angry, humming sound of a mob. In the cradle Eli had built, Grace began to fuss. The tension in the small cabin was a physical thing, a pressure in the air, and the baby felt it. Her fussing turned into a thin, rising cry. "They are here," Eli said. His voice was flat. The figures broke from the tree line. There were perhaps 20 of them, men mostly, but a few women, huddled in the back. They were not strangers. Clara saw Mr. Sloan, the blacksmith, his shoulders broad and set. She saw Jed Miller, his face a mask of hate. And at the front, holding not a torch, but a thick, leather-bound Bible, was her uncle, Reverend Amos Loudon. They stopped about 30 yards from the cabin, forming a ragged half-circle. The torchlight threw their shadows long and dancing against the snow. They looked like demons, their faces lit from below, their breath pluming in the icy air. The Reverend held up his hand. The murmuring stopped. "Clara Loudon," he boomed. His voice cut the night, sharp and powerful. "You have hidden yourself in this den of wickedness. You have consorted with a killer. You have brought forth a child of sin." Clara flinched, her grip tightening on the rifle. Grace's cry became a wail. "The town of Dead Willow will not suffer this stain," her uncle shouted, his voice rising in righteous fury. He was not talking to her. He was preaching to the men behind him. "We are here to cleanse this ground. We are here to save your soul from the fire." "He is mad," Clara whispered, her body shaking. "He wants the child," Eli said, his voice low. He cannot have the girl who defied him. He needs the child to prove he was right. "Come out, Clara," the Reverend commanded. "Hand over the child to be raised in the light of God. Renounce the demon that holds you. Renounce your sin, and we will show you mercy." "What mercy?" Clara spat, her fear turning to a cold, hard anger. "The mercy he showed my brother." Eli looked at her. Then he did the last thing she expected. He leaned his rifle against the wall. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "They came for a monster," he said. "They came to fight the devil. If I go out armed, I am what they expect. I give them the fight they want." "Eli, they will kill you!" "Bar the door behind me," he said. He did not look at her. He was watching the mob. "Do not open it, and do not shoot. Not unless they touch this cabin." "I will not let you." "Do not shoot," he repeated, his voice hard. "Let them show who they are." Before she could stop him, he unbarred the door and stepped outside. He walked 10 paces into the snow and stopped, standing between the mob and the cabin. He was unarmed. He wore no coat. The torchlight fell on his scarred face, on his bruised and swollen eye. He looked like something risen from a hard grave. The crowd went silent. The men gripped their rifles, surprised. This was not the attack they had prepared for. Eli stood tall, his hands open at his sides. He looked at the Reverend. "You want to punish someone." His voice was not loud, but it carried in the cold, still air. "You want to cleanse a sin? She is in that cabin, healing from childbirth. The sin is mine." He looked at the crowd, at Sloan, at Miller. "Punish me." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not in the sermon. Reverend Loudon's face, pale in the torchlight, darkened with rage. Eli was stealing his moment. He was changing the story. "You admit it," the Reverend shrieked. "You admit you defiled her. You admit you are the father." "I admit," Eli said, his voice steady, "that she was alone, and I was there. Now punish me. Reverend, or are you a coward? Do you only punish women and children?" The word coward hit Amos Loudon harder than a fist. His eyes went wild. He looked around, his authority slipping, the crowd looking at him, waiting. "You will not speak to me of cowardice," he screamed. He dropped his Bible in the snow. He reached behind him and took something from Jed Miller. It was a long black whip, a bullwhip, thick and heavy. "You want penance?" the Reverend hissed, his voice dropping. "I will give you penance. You will be cleansed." He swung the whip. It cracked through the air, a sound like a rifle shot, and bit into Eli's chest. It tore through his thin shirt, leaving a dark, bleeding line. Eli did not cry out. He did not move. He just took it, his good eye fixed on the Reverend. Inside the cabin, Clara screamed. She clawed at the bar. "Eli!" The Reverend swung the whip again. A furious, desperate sound. Crack! It laid open Eli's shoulder. He swung again. Crack! And again. Crack! He was a man possessed. His face twisted, grunting with the effort, the whip rising and falling, cutting Eli's arms, his back, his chest. Eli stood. He took every blow. He did not fall. He did not even look away. He just stood, bleeding in the snow, his silence a louder judgment than any sermon. Clara could not bear it. She tore the bar away from the door and ripped it open. She stood in the doorway, the rifle at her shoulder, aimed not at her uncle, but at the man beside him, at Mr. Sloan. She fired. The bullet whined past Sloan's ear and buried itself in the tree behind him. The crowd yelled, scattering back. The men raised their own rifles, pointing them, not at her, but at Eli. "No!" Clara shrieked. Eli turned his head, just enough to look at her. He was bleeding from a dozen places, his shirt in ribbons, but his voice was calm. "Do not kill them, Clara," he whispered, a ragged breath. "Do not let them make you this. Let them be the monsters." His words hit her. Let them be the monsters. She looked at the faces in the crowd. The men, their guns raised. The women, their faces pale with shock and a terrible, vicarious excitement. Her uncle, his chest heaving, the whip hanging from his hand. She understood. This was not a fight to be won with bullets. She lowered the rifle, slowly, deliberately. She leaned it against the doorframe. Just inside, she stepped back into the cabin for 1 second, and when she came back out, she was holding the bundle wrapped in blankets. She was holding Grace. She walked out into the snow, past Eli. She stopped in the center of the circle, the torchlight bright on her face. Grace, terrified by the gunshot and the shouting, was screaming, a high, desperate newborn wail. Clara said nothing. She just stood there. She let them look. She let them see her. She let them see the face, pale and gaunt from starvation and blood loss. She let them see the dark, hollowed-out eyes of a woman who had not slept. She let them see the tears that were still, and always, drying on her cheeks. She let them see her hands, raw and chapped from the cold. One hand clutching the baby, the other hanging at her side, her knuckles bruised. She let them see the blood stain on the hem of her skirt, the one she had not been able to wash out. She let them see the raw purple bruise on her shoulder where the rifle butt had kicked her. Again and again. She let them hear the sound of a baby, not yet a month old, crying in the freezing, hostile night. She said nothing. She just held her child and let them see what they had done. The silence that fell was heavy. It was broken only by the baby's cry. The men, their rifles raised, looked at each other. They looked at Clara. This was not the harlot. This was not the demon. This was a girl they had known since she was small. This was a new mother. Several of the women in the back, the ones who had come to see the sin punished, lowered their eyes. Mrs. Davies, the midwife, put a hand to her own mouth. She knew the look of childbirth. She knew the cost. One of the old-timers, a man named Silas, who had sat in the square, spat into the snow. "This ain't right. Amos," he muttered, his voice loud in the quiet. "This ain't God's work." The line of men wavered. The righteousness was gone. The mob was just a group of cold, tired neighbors, suddenly horribly ashamed of themselves. Reverend Loudon saw it. He saw his power, his certainty, his town, dissolving in the snow. He looked at Clara, at the baby, and all his fury focused on that one small thing, the evidence of his failure. "The child!" he bellowed, his voice cracking. "It is unclean. It must be baptized. Give me the child." He lunged, not at Eli, but at Clara. He dropped the whip and reached for the baby, his hands like claws. Eli moved. It was not a conscious thought. It was pure reflex. He threw himself between the preacher and Clara. He was not a shield. He was an intercept. He hit his uncle with his full weight, a tackle that sent both men sprawling. The Reverend screamed, a sound of pure hate. "Devil!" Eli was on top, his hands grabbing his uncle's wrists. But the Reverend, in his madness, was strong. He had a knife, a skinning knife, tucked in his belt. He pulled it free and, with a desperate, upward thrust, he plunged it deep into Eli's shoulder, near the collarbone. Eli roared. It was a sound of pure agony. He stiffened, the knife buried to the hilt, and rolled off, clutching the wound. Clara screamed, a raw, piercing sound that cut through the baby's cries. It was over. Everything was broken. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. But the rage, the grief, it all came together in one final, desperate act. She scrambled back to the doorway, grabbed her rifle, and turned, holding the baby against her hip with one arm, the heavy rifle in the other. She did not aim. She just pointed it at the black, cold sky, and she fired. Crack! The shot echoed, rolling over the hills, a punctuation mark at the end of the world. "No!" she screamed, her voice breaking, the tears finally flowing in a hot, blinding rush. "No more! No more men will die over me! Do you hear me? No more!" She stood there, shaking, half mad with grief, the rifle smoking, the baby wailing. That was it. The shot, the scream, the sight of the girl, the baby, and the two men bleeding in the snow. It was too much. It was not justice. It was just blood. The crowd broke. It was not a retreat. It was a dissolution. Mrs. Davies was the first. She turned, pulling her husband. "Thomas, let's go home. This is wrong." Sloane lowered his rifle. He looked at the Reverend, who was scrambling to his feet, his face wild. Sloane just shook his head, disgusted, and turned. Miller followed him. One by one, in twos and threes, the townsfolk turned their backs. They walked away. The torches lowered, dipping toward the snow. They were murmuring, ashamed, not looking at each other. They just wanted to be gone. They wanted to be in their warm beds and forget this night, forget the sound of the whip, and the baby, and the knife. In a minute, they were gone. The light of their torches faded as they disappeared back into the trees. Only one man was left, Reverend Amos Loudon. He stood alone in the trampled, bloody snow. He looked at the retreating lights of his congregation. They had abandoned him. "Come back!" he shrieked. "Sinners! Fools! You will all burn! The fire will take you! He that is not with me is against me!" No one came back. He was alone, shouting scripture at the empty, frozen hills. Clara did not watch him. She dropped the rifle and ran to Eli. He was on his knees, his head bowed, his hand clamped to his shoulder. Blood, black in the moonlight, was pouring between his fingers. "Eli," she breathed. She touched his good arm. He looked up. His face was pale, his good eye glazed with pain. He saw her. He saw the baby. He saw that they were safe. He collapsed. He did not fall. He just emptied. He pitched forward, face first, into the snow. "No, no! Eli, stay with me!" Clara put Grace down in the cradle, which was just inside the door. She grabbed Eli by his coat, under his arms. He was a dead weight. She was weak. "You cannot," she wept, pulling. "You cannot do this. Get up." He did not move. She hooked her arms under his. She set her feet, and she dragged him. She dragged him, 1 inch at a time, backward, her boots slipping in the bloody snow. She dragged him over the threshold, into the cabin. She slammed the door. She dropped the heavy bar into place. She was safe. She collapsed against the door, her body finally giving out, her lungs burning. She looked at Eli, a dark, unmoving shape on the floor. She looked at Grace, who was finally, blessedly, quiet in the cradle. And she looked at the fireplace. The fire, which she had fed for a non-hour, had been neglected. The last log had burned through. The flames were gone. There was only a faint, dull, red glow from the embers. A draft slipped under the door. The embers faded, a red eye closing. The cabin went dark. Outside, the Reverend's shouting finally stopped. The only sound left was the wind, rising up, howling down from the peaks, louder than a man, louder than a mob, louder than anything. It was the only voice left. That night, the wind was the only thing that moved. Inside the cabin, it was as still and cold as a grave. Clara did not have the strength to build the fire again. She had dragged Eli to the cot, his body an impossible, limp weight. She had covered him with every blanket, every skin, but he was cold, and his breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. The knife hilt stuck out of his shoulder, a dark piece of wood. She was too terrified to pull it out, too terrified to leave it in. She sat on the floor beside him, her own body numb, her arms and back screaming from the effort of dragging him. She held Grace inside her own coat, sharing the last of her body's failing warmth. The baby was quiet. her small body exhausted. Clara stared into the dark. She waited for morning. She waited for death. She did not know which would come for him, or for them. When the first pale gray light of dawn finally seeped through the paper window, Eli was still breathing. The rattle was worse. He was burning with fever. Clara knew she had no choice. The town was gone. Her uncle was gone. There was no one. There was only her. She put Grace in the cradle, wrapping her tight. "I have to," she whispered to the sleeping infant. "I have to save him." She went to Eli. She looked at the knife. It was her uncle's, the one he had carried. She grabbed the hilt. Eli's body was slick with fever sweat. She closed her eyes and pulled. It came out with a sick, sucking sound. Eli's body arched off the cot in a silent scream, his back bowing, and then he collapsed, unconscious. Blood, dark and thick, poured from the wound. Clara, her hands shaking so hard she could barely see, grabbed the bag of flour Eli had cached. She had seen her father do this with a gored horse. She packed the wound with the dry flour, her hands covered in the sticky, red-black paste. She pushed and packed, tears of terror streaming down her face, until the bleeding slowed, then finally, sluggishly, stopped. She tore strips from her one good petticoat. She boiled water from the melted snow, her hands now steady, her mind cold and clear. She had been to the edge and back. This was just one more thing. She cleaned the wound as best she could. She bound it tight. For 2 weeks, he did not wake. Not really. He was in the fever lands. He thrashed, his good eye rolling back, his voice a low, rough rasp. He spoke to his dead. He spoke to Thomas, begging him to run. He spoke to the Haynes brothers, his voice full of a terrible, quiet hate. He spoke to the fire, telling it to burn it all clean. Clara did not leave his side. She fed Grace with one hand and with the other. She spooned water and thin broth between his cracked, black lips. She washed his face. She held him down when the nightmares came. She spoke to him, her voice low and calm. "It is all right. Eli, I am here. You are safe. It is just me. It is Clara." She did not know if he heard. During those long, dark weeks, she tended the whip marks. She washed the crusted blood from his back and chest. She saw the map of his old life, the melted ruin of his face and arm, and now the new, fresh map of her uncle's hatred. The wounds were deep, purple and black, lines of agony that crossed his ribs. She touched them gently, her fingers tracing the cost of saving her, and she did not feel shame. She did not feel pity. She felt a deep, aching tenderness that was so strong it was almost anger. And then, one day, the spring came. It did not come all at once. It came with a sound, the sound of dripping. The massive drifts of snow that had buried the cabin, that had been their fortress and their prison, began to weep. Water ran in small trickles from the roof. The world, which had been silent and white, was now filled with the sound of a great, slow melting. The snow pulled back, revealing the earth. It was a raw, wounded land, muddy and scarred. The trampled circle in front of the cabin, where the mob had stood, was a dark, ugly patch of churned mud. But the melt was a cleansing. Streams, loud and full, rushed down the hillsides. The creek was no longer a frozen line, but a roaring, brown river. And in that muddy, bloody patch in front of the door, where Eli had bled, something green pushed up, tiny, insistent points of life. Clara watched them every day. They were wildflowers, small, white blooms, like drops of spilled milk. They grew where the blood had fallen, life pushing up right through the death. On the day she saw the first flower open, Eli woke up. She was sitting on the stool, nursing Grace. His good eye opened. It was not glazed. It was clear. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the window, where the bright, watery spring light was pouring in. Then he looked at her. He saw her, sitting in the light, the baby at her breast. He just stared, as if he had never seen a thing so real.
"Clara,"
he breathed. His voice was a dry scrape. She cried. She had not cried when he was stabbed, had not cried when she pulled the knife, had not cried during the long fever, but she cried now. Quiet, easy tears of pure relief. His recovery was slow, slower than the spring. The wound in his shoulder healed, but it left him stiff. It left a new, puckered scar. A reminder. His body was a roadmap of survival. The old burns, the whip marks, the stab. But as his body healed, something else healed, too. The haunted look in his good eye began to fade. The silence, which had been a wall, became a space, a quiet peace. He had faced the town. He had not run. He had been seen at his worst. And in his truth, he had taken the punishment, and he was still here. The ghosts did not have the same power anymore. He watched her. He watched her with grace. He watched the way she had changed. She was not the frightened girl who had stumbled into his loft. She was not the shaking woman who had run from her uncle's house. Her face was thinner, her hands were rough, but her eyes were steady. She had been through the fire and had not burned. One day, when he was strong enough to sit on the porch, he watched her write a letter. She had a small bit of paper and a nub of pencil she had found in his things. She wrote, her tongue caught between her teeth, her handwriting careful, like a child's. "Who do you write to?" he asked. He was whittling. He was always whittling now, his hands needing to be busy. "My father's cousin," she said, not looking up. "In Colorado, he has a small ranch near the San Juan Mountains. My mother always said he was a good man, a quiet man." "What do you tell him?" She paused. "I tell him my father is gone. I tell him Thomas is dead. I tell him I am alone, and that I have a daughter. I ask if he has work, or a place for me. I do not tell him the rest." "How will you send it?" "The trapper," she said, "the one you trade with. He passes by the canyon road once a month. I will meet him." Eli nodded. He knew the one. A week later, he walked the 10 miles with her, his stride still uneven, his arm held stiff. He carried Grace, who was bundled on his good shoulder. Clara met the trapper, a leathery old man who looked at them with no questions in his eyes, and gave him the letter and a silver dollar, the last thing she had of her mother's. "It will be 2 months," the trapper said, "if he even gets it, and 2 more for a reply." "I will wait," Clara said, and so they waited. The spring turned into a warm, clear summer. The high plains were green. The cabin, once a place of terror, became almost a home. They fell into a life. It was a simple, hard life. He taught her to snare rabbits, to fish in the creek with a line and hook. He tended a small garden, planting the beans and corn he had saved. She cooked, she mended, she cared for Grace. But it was his time with the baby that Clara watched. He was so clumsy. His hands, scarred and hardened, looked too big, too rough to hold something so small. But he was so gentle. When Grace would cry in the night, he would be the one to get her. He would walk her, his heavy boots pacing the small floor, his low, rough voice humming a tune that was not a tune, just a sound, a vibration. He would talk to her when he thought Clara was outside. Clara would stand by the door, listening. "Now, you see," he would whisper to the baby, who was staring up at his face. "This here is a hawk. He flies high. He sees everything. No one can sneak up on him." He was carving. He had carved the bird he started, and then a wolf, and then a small, perfect horse. He would sand them with a smooth stone until they were soft in her hand. Clara would watch him, his scarred face bent over the tiny piece of wood, his good eye focused, his knife moving with that same delicate precision she had seen in his drawings. He was giving his daughter the world he knew, the one of pine and stone and wild things. She watched him, and she knew. The trapper came back in late August. The hills were already turning gold. a hint of the cold to come. He handed Clara a letter. Her hands shook. She read it on the porch, Eli sitting on the step below her, pretending not to watch. The news was good. Her cousin, a man named Silas Blackwood, remembered her. He grieved for her father and brother. He had land. He had lost his wife years ago. He said there was always a place for blood, and for a woman who could work. He said to come before the first snow, a future, a safe place, a home, with family. It was everything she had prayed for. She folded the letter. Eli did not ask. He just kept whittling, his knife making small, whispery sounds. She stood there for a long time, looking out at the mountains. They were not her mountains, but they were the ones that had sheltered her. She looked at the cabin. It was not her home, but it was the place her child was born. She looked down at the top of Eli's head, at his dark, tangled hair. She knew. She waited. She waited for a week. She held the letter, this promise of a new life, and it felt like a lie. It felt like an escape. It felt like the easy thing. One evening, the air was crisp, the first cold snap of autumn. They sat on the porch, as they always did. Grace was asleep in her cradle. Just inside the door, the sun was going down, painting the sky in shades of purple and blood orange. Eli was carving. He was quiet. He had been quiet ever since the letter came, a return to his old, walled-off silence. He was waiting for her to leave. He was making it easy for her. Clara stood up. She went to him. He did not look up. She bent down and she kissed him. It was not like the kiss in the dark, the one of desperation and hunger. This was soft. It was simple. It was a kiss on the corner of his mouth, on his good side. He froze. The knife stopped moving. She straightened up. "I am not going," she said. He still did not look at her. He just stared at the piece of wood in his hands. "You should," he said, his voice a low rasp. "It is a good place. It is safe. For you, for Grace." "It is not safe," she said. "It is just empty." She knelt in front of him, so he had to look at her. "I am not going anywhere unless you are with me." He finally raised his head. His good eye. It was not calm. It was not peaceful. It was terrified. He was more scared now than when he had faced the mob. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. You cannot tie yourself to me. You know what I am. You know what I have done. You saw those men. They will never let you forget. They will never let her forget." He gestured with his head toward the cradle. "Everywhere we go, that name will follow. Killer, barn burner. They will look at you, and they will see the woman who ran off with a monster. They will look at Grace, and they will see his child. I will not do that to you." He looked away, his jaw set, his pain a raw, physical thing. He was trying to save her, the only way he knew how, by pushing her away. She smiled, a small, sad smile. "Then we will leave," she said. He looked at her, confused. "To Colorado?" "No," she said. She reached out and touched his scarred hand, the one holding the knife. "We will not go to my family. We will not go to anyone we know. We will just go. We will go north or west. We will find a place where no one has a name." She gripped his hand. "Listen to me, Eli. They will call us what they want. They will call me a whore. They will call you a killer. But that is not what we are. We are just people who lived through something awful." Her voice was strong now, the strength she had found in the pain, in the childbirth, in the firing of the rifle. "We lived through it," she said, her eyes locked on his. "And we came out loving anyway. That is all that matters. I will not let them define us, and I will not let you hide from me. Not anymore." He stared at her. He saw his drawings. He saw her face in the hayloft. He saw her on the floor, bleeding. He saw her on the porch, holding his child. He saw his life. He did not say anything. He just turned his scarred hand over and For the first time, he held hers. They packed the next morning. It did not take long. They had almost nothing. He packed the dried meat and the last of the corn. He packed the blankets and the single iron pot. He packed his axe and his knife and the rifle. Clara packed Grace. She bundled her onto her back, in a sling Eli had made from a deer hide. She took the small, carved animals. She left the cradle. It was too heavy. It belonged to the cabin. They stood at the door. The cabin was empty. It was just a crude box of logs. But it held everything. It held the ghosts of her brother and the Haynes brothers. It held the screams of childbirth and the cries of the mob. It held the memory of the whip and the fever. Clara looked at the hearth, now cold. "I was so scared here," she whispered. "I know," Eli said. He put his good hand on her shoulder. "I am not scared anymore." She turned, and she did not look back. They walked out of the clearing. They walked past the patch of wildflowers, now dried and gone to seed. They did not take the path down to Dead Willow. They turned west, climbing the ridge toward the high, unknown lands. They walked. They did not run. The sun was just coming up. It was a cold, clear autumn morning. The sun rose behind them, at their backs. It cast their shadows long in front of them. Two small, tall figures, walking side by side. She with the baby on her back, her steps sure. He with the rifle in his hand, his limp barely noticeable, his scarred face turned toward the future. The sun pushed them forward, the light spreading over the high plains, over the vast, empty, unknown country. They were leaving the night behind. They were no longer hiding. They were no longer alone. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from, so we can all connect, and be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.